This is Mark Bellum, Super Training Gym, the strongest gym in the West. We're here today with James Smith, and we got a Q&A that I did on my Instagram, so we're going to ask you a couple questions. You okay with that?
Yes.
All right. Let's get to it. Somebody wants to know your opinion on carbs.
When presented in the right fashion, I find them incredibly tasty.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, so carbohydrates and nutrition is not my field of expertise. That has to be established. So what can be stated uncontroversially is that the role that carbohydrates play and the way glycogen as a substrate of it is treated in the body, resultant of different types of physical work, is not an absolute. And the reason that this is not controversial is because you can speak to one type of athlete who does very well both in terms of blood test, performance, body composition, with really high carbohydrate intake, and let's say low fat and reasonably high protein, something considerable to a stereotypical bodybuilding sort of profile of macronutrients, and another athlete in the same sport of similar body composition and great results who eats comparatively really low carbohydrates and a lot more fat, let's say even saturated fat and protein, and their blood work is really good along with their body composition and performance. And so apart from the sport endeavors that are linked to the substrates of what we eat, of how the macronutrients are broken down and utilized depending upon the loads that are placed upon the body from the nature of the physical actions. If you're just thinking about training to be muscular or strong, then there's more subjectivity, which is why you can encounter lifters, for example, probably much less so in the bodybuilding realm because of the anabolic effects of carbohydrates. You'd be hard pressed to find a competitive bodybuilder who's eating a low carbohydrate diet
For any extended period of time, yeah.
For any extended period of time, you will encounter guys that will say there might be periods where they're eating, say, more fats and proteins and lower carbohydrates for whatever reason, but to achieve high levels of muscularity in addition of lean muscle mass, the carbohydrates play a very important role. And then apart from that, the variability from one person to the next is extraordinary, and so it's irresponsible to speak in absolutes. And so an interesting thing that you can do from the blood work testing to determine how well your body processes carbohydrates and insulin sensitivity, etc., is the HbA1c. This was the acronym that I was forgetting. Glycosylated hemoglobin test.
Oh yes, how could we forget?
This is a test that anybody could request, in a physical and whatnot. And what it gives you a picture of is the way your body is dealing with these substrates over I think it's about a 3-month period. So it's a really objective look at what's happening in terms of blood sugar relative to how you're eating. And the more objectivity that you can impart on decision making, the more responsible the decision making process becomes. And so you have to provide a really specific context, in my judgment, to provide a responsible answer when it comes to nutrition, carbohydrates, or the other macronutrients.
Yeah, and whenever you guys hear me talk about it, I normally talk about carbohydrates from a more mental standpoint. Anyone who's obese or anybody who struggles with their body weight for long periods of time, and they're on one diet and off another diet and so on, I sometimes like to suggest that people do low carbohydrates for periods of time just to introduce some new practices and to try to get used to getting away from some of the junk, because a lot of the junk foods are going to have carbs and sugars, and that's where candy, ice cream, pizza, all the things that taste awesome are going to come into play. And for those of you that are addicted to them, it's easy just to try to go, in my opinion, it's easiest sometimes just to go cold turkey. But I'm not ever saying that not having carbohydrates in your diet is great for performance, which sometimes people get misconstrued on. What kind of mobility does a power lifter need, just for performance wise and also injury prevention?
So you first need to look at what degrees of joint movement you require to achieve the competitive positions. So to squat deep enough, to deadlift in such a fashion where you're not presenting any excessive load, particularly on the lumbar region of the spine.
Just to interject a little bit, we just shot a long YouTube video, probably broken up into 2 or 3 parts, where we went through bench, squat, and deadlift. And James specifically talked about the lumbar spine in a deadlift, and how you never take it for granted, and you always want to practice safety, and you never want to just compromise it and let yourself round over and get into flexion, get into these compromised positions. So I think, you know, a real important factor is just that you can maintain the proper positioning throughout an entire range of motion, and then some, right? You should be able to move through the range of motion with a little bit of play in the system, right?
So you can apply the concept of a reserve to anything, and your mobility reserve would be the differential between how absolutely mobile a joint is and what is actually required of that joint in competition. So the reserve, let's say on a squat, and we're looking at the magnitude of hip flexion that is occurring to achieve depth and what that depends upon, and we're looking for the preservation of the lordotic curve first and foremost, so that the lumbar spine is never compromised in an effort to achieve depth. The question as to how mobile must you be? Well, first and foremost, to achieve, I'm using the squat as an example, the competitive squat depth void of orthopedic compromise. So that's how mobile you must be. And then as to the question as to how much more mobile must you be, that's where we get into the gray area of there cannot be a definitive answer, because the point is you're mobile enough to perform the competition action void of orthopedic compromise.
Well, it's maybe safe to say too, in some respects, that those of us who may have gotten so much into strength that we have recognized, or someone else even introduced us to the fact that maybe we've lost some mobility, or maybe we lost some level of fitness over the years. Can you kind of just make the statement of saying, like, hey, look, you kind of know that you are not physically capable of this, and therefore you should spend a little bit more time on it. I mean, it's reasonable to kind of think, like, I mean, each person, as you've been lifting for a period of time, should start to recognize that they are falling apart, or that things are getting stiffer, that they've lost some of their athleticism. I know myself, I've lost a lot of athleticism to the point where even a simple movement like lunges is more difficult now than it was years ago. So why not take the time, and I guess is what I'm saying, I'm going to take the time to pull back a little bit, work on that, because if you're healthier, you're probably going to be stronger.
Well, I'm not sure that, I mean, I agree with you. There probably couldn't be a direct line of causality between some level of general preparation and the strongest attainable marks. I wouldn't say that, there's not a direct link between general preparation and the strongest people in the world. However, I think you certainly give yourself the opportunity to be the healthiest the longest.
Right.
And if you're not healthy, I'm not speaking specifically in terms of blood tests, but in terms of muscular and joint health, then you're able, your training isn't interrupted. If your pec is not torn,
right, then
you're training hard and you're in a position to set a personal record. And so it's applying specific context to answering the question. There's so many benefits of being generally fit and mobile, and in no way does achieving high results, let's say in powerlifting or Olympic weightlifting or strongman, have to in any way be synonymous with losing mobility, losing general fitness. Absolutely not. It's simply that what's happened with yourself is If someone who becomes really strong simply doesn't choose to maintain a certain level of general fitness or flexibility or what have you, then these things are all perishable. You will lose them, but in no way must anyone think, if you're like Mark and you're going after a 600-pound bench press.
It doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, and in no way must you think, oh man, I really want that 600-pound bench, but I know that what it's going to take to get it is me really losing my flexibility and becoming really unfit. That's not true at all, because we're not talking about someone like Mark simultaneously being in a position to be competitive in the triathlete. That's not what we're talking about when we're saying a general level of fitness. We're saying that he's able to negotiate what would be considered just sort of ordinary tasks. If he's going on a day trip, hiking a mountain with his kids, that shouldn't be even a concern of, oh man, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do it. It's something like that's just general fitness. We're talking about walking for a few hours. As you become more specific, then we're not talking about being an elite endurance athlete simultaneously with breaking a world record in powerlifting. And so a reasonable level of all-around fitness, a high level of specific fitness should, in my judgment, be just commonplace with any athlete.
Approach and tips. You've already touched upon this a little bit, but approach and tips for maximizing performance. This guy says specifically in powerlifting, but he also says maybe just all strength sports. I guess you could just even generalize it even more and just say all sports period, since it's all very similar stuff.
Similar to what I talk about with sport coaches who I consult with, is in my view, the entirely unarguable foundations of sports success or sport optimization, according to your question, are first and foremost a series of emergent qualities that stem from the bedrock of cultural establishment that is all-encompassing relative to the objectives set forth. And from that culture then emerges psychological preparation, technical mastery of the endeavor, tactical decision-making and pattern recognition, and all these. In powerlifting, the tactical knowledge, it would be selecting the proper weights for your attempts relative to the competitors. The sensory motor acquisition doesn't apply nearly as much in powerlifting as it does in other sports, where you're determining the movements and recognition of patterns from opponents in combat, team, and otherwise. And all the elements of biodynamic and bioenergetic and biomotor preparation absolutely apply, in addition to the physiotherapeutic interventions. So that composite of fundamental abilities, as I define them, are absolutely necessary to establish in an objectively true and useful way, to secure the optimization of results. Now, that's not a short answer, and it's not a necessarily simple thing to think about, yet that is the truth of the matter as I would define it. And so to optimize performance, you must have a handle of what those substrates of performance are, and that's how I describe them.
When it comes to a psychology standpoint, how do you get somebody to do something they've never done before? Have you encountered an athlete that maybe doesn't believe in themselves quite as much as they should? What are some recipes? What are some things you try to put together? If there are any exercises to strengthen the mind, what are some things that you try to do?
So there's a lot of different ways to approach solving that problem. And in one example of demonstrating to someone psychologically what it really means in principle to accomplish something that you've never done before can be viewed in principle as no different than actually doing anything that you've never done before, to show that in fact you've satisfied the principle of accomplishing a task that you've never done before. So Mark has not unequipped bench pressed 611 pounds before. But nor is it likely that he has, with his pinky in his left nostril, sung the hymn of the Soviet Union. Now, these are two things he hasn't done before. So if we go down the list of things we haven't done before, we can easily show somebody in principle, there's a lot of things we haven't done before that we can all do.
You're making me thinking of a scene from Family Guy.
You know what I mean? In principle, there's a lot of things we haven't done before.
Right.
Some are more challenging than others. And so on the basis of principle, we can say, okay, let's, because there's a lot of things we can do that we've never done before, even though some are more challenging than others, let's take that off the table in terms of any significance we're going to apply to it. And then instead of that, devote our attention towards something that is of relevance in my view, which is taking a look at what the objective is, understanding the objective in its entirety in terms of all of its substructure, working backwards from what that objective is. We are then serving to inoculate ourselves or to prepare ourselves, or whatever the colloquial preference of yours is, to condition ourselves for that set of strategically identified objectives. And this gives anybody the best chance for success in attaining that objective.
Makes sense. All right, well, that's the Thinker. That's all the time we got for the Q&A. Appreciate it. And where can people find you on the internet?
2 websites, athleteconsulting.net and globalsportconcepts.net.
That's it from Super Training Gym. Later.